Hello everyone, welcome back to FiddleUP. My name is Emerald Ray, and in this video we're going to be talking about how to be professional. Now, this might seem like an uber basic topic for going over things. We all know how to be professional in situations. Well, most of us do anyway, but you would be surprised how much unprofessional behavior there is in the arts in general, and especially in music. It's just one of those professions that a lot of people, it's their fun thing, and sometimes it's their fun thing turned into some kind of profession at some point, but it's just like, any situation where you're having to run your own business and you're having to freelance or whatever is sort of rife for there being some kind of unprofessional behavior here or there. And, there's varying levels of seriousness in terms of people getting into this profession, especially at the lower levels. So I just want to go over what exactly that means. And it's possible also that this is just a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I have always, tried really hard to be super professional, and I'm kind of known for that in my little scene. And so, it's, it's just one of those things that's a pet peeve for me when other people aren't being professional. I think if you're making money doing anything, if you're doing a gig where somebody's handing you actual money, then it's your responsibility to be professional. It doesn't matter if you do this part-time. It doesn't matter if you have a day job and this is just your thing you do on the weekends. There are some of us who do this full-time, and it's much better for everybody if everybody's acting professionally. There's a lot of unprofessional behavior that happens in music, and I would say if somebody's being unprofessional, I would try not to work with them. Honestly, it's not worth it. So there are some people who are really, great musicians and very creative and great at what they do. But they don't treat it like a job. They treat it like a hobby, or they treat it like something that somebody else has to take care of them. I promise you there are great, very professional musicians out there who are really great musicians, who are really creative, and also manage to write their emails and stuff like that. It's like, you want to be one of those. Let's just put it that way. You do. So, there is, an old saying, everybody knows it, hard work beats talent when talent won't work hard. That's what I'm talking about. So let's talk about what professional means. And then again, for those of you who know what professional is, this is going to seem like basic 101. But if you are a professional person, it's good to watch this so you know what to watch out for with other people you may be trying to work with. And so I like to say professional is the 3 P's, and this is just the beginning. Like, this is just the first rung on the ladder of professionalism. But for me, punctuality, preparedness, and positivity are my 3 P's. Those are the 3 things that I feel required just to start off with. And so punctuality, showing up to the gig on time, not just the gig, but the sound check and stuff. Like when you have a gig, there's going to be not only a sound check, but a load-in time. And the load-in time is actually when you want to get there. Make sure you get there early, make sure you have time to get there, make sure you have time to get through traffic. Every one of us has been late to something at some point or another, but it is not something you want to be in the habit of. And you definitely don't want to be missing sound check, missing everything, and just turning up to the gig, or turning up to the gig late, even if it's more of a bar gig situation where you're just plugging in really quickly and line checking. You want to make sure that you're on time. You have the habit of being on time, because that is a reason to be fired from bands. Honestly, sometimes I've worked with musicians that were very talented, but kind of there were some problems, and then they were late to a gig, and that was enough for us to just be like, okay, bye-bye now. So gotta be careful with that. Again, I have been late to gigs before, but I definitely make it a priority to be the person who is there early all the time. In fact, I was accidentally late to sound check. I messed up the time, got confused. I don't know what happened, but I called the band immediately, and I was like, oh my gosh, I messed up the time. I will be there. I will do my line check really quickly, la la la. And they were concerned about me, actually, because that was so out of character. They were like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yes, I was just an idiot today. It's all good." So punctuality is numero uno on my list. Preparedness, and this is just something that is so important for a gig or a rehearsal, to be prepared in whatever being prepared means. And if that means making sure you have all the parts really practiced and down and as perfect as possible, then that's what it means. If it means that you show up to a gig that you kind of have to improvise, know how to improvise before you get in there. It's kind of important. So make sure you have the skills to get through the gig, and make sure you're constantly adding to your skill base. If you are showing up to gig after gig and having the same problem over and over again, if you're struggling with how to do your sound check, if you're struggling with this, that, or the other thing, fix it. Like, learn how to do that thing that you're always struggling with doing. Now, again, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes there will be things that you just can't tackle or blah, blah, blah. But basic things, like in terms of, showing up to the gig, getting through the gig process, being, professional with the people who have hired you, with the venue, the promoter, the other band members and stuff. Like, there's basics, and you kind of get a sense of what those basics are. And if you're the person who is having a recurring problem, that would be a reason to not hire you again. So just so you know, it's really an issue. And then positivity is the last one. Gigging is hard, and it's not going to be smooth sailing all of the time. And there's going to be times when you have to ad lib, when you have to make something up. And the worst thing possible is to have negative energy coming into that space. And so, it's really important for the morale of the band, for everybody to be committed to being positive about what happens. And bands that work long term figure out at a certain point, what the positivity level needs to be for everybody to feel like they can keep going with this. Because there's just a lot of variables, and you're constantly getting dodgeballs thrown at you. And if your personality reacts negatively to a lot of those things, it's going to be a bummer for the rest of everyone. So just bear that in mind. Like, positivity, it sounds sort of hippy-dippy to say, oh, just be positive about everything. But actually, it's really essential for working with a band that everybody has a positive attitude, and a positive attitude towards each other, because that really encourages trust in a band. And if you're in a band where things change and you have to swap the set list, you gotta improvise something, highly improvisational bands have a lot of trust among them, and a lot of like, I got your back if something goes wrong. So you want to make sure you have positivity. So those are the 3 P's: punctuality, preparedness, and positivity. But it doesn't stop there. I'm going to keep going. There's a few more things that I want to talk about. Assertiveness. Assertiveness is a really, really important skill. And in terms of professionalism, assertiveness is something that you're going to have to learn and get comfortable on the way. It's not as easy as the 3 Ps, where you can just go, okay, I can show up on time and be prepared, and I can be positive. That's kind of like 101. After you get through those stages, you're going to want to figure out what your business savvy is, and how do you deal with being assertive in rehearsals, for standing up for what you want for your role in the band. Any kind of just being assertive but kind is, generally the way to go. What you don't want is to fall into being bossy and being a diva. Sometimes that happens. And figuring out a good level of assertiveness, where you say, I am a confident, capable musician, and I know what I can do and what I can't do, and what I can commit to this gig and what I can't commit to this gig, and how much money I can do it for, and just being assertive. And, it's really about being realistic about what can really happen and what you can manage. And assertiveness is just creating a little boundaries around, what your job is in that role, without getting overstretched, so that you don't, have have a bad day and a meltdown. It all doesn't get too much for you. And believe me, I've been there. I had to learn my assertiveness just to keep myself together. If you're doing a lot of sideman gigs and, a lot of things where you're hired on, people will ask for everything. People will ask you to do everything. And in general too, people will just ask for what they want. And if you're not sort of being assertive about what you can manage to do, then, things can go haywire pretty quickly. So assertiveness is really something that's key. It's not something that's super easy to come in at the beginning, but it's something to be aware of from the beginning so you can develop your personal brand of assertiveness. And the second thing is being effective. Now, this is another thing you have to work on over time. And so being effective is doing your job well, but it's doing your job well for the situation. And that's going to look a little different from situation to situation. But, as you're being hired as a musician, you want to think about how, your effectiveness in terms of, are you getting the job done? And effectiveness doesn't mean, am I doing what I want? Because what you want and your idea in the moment might not be the most effective thing for the entire project. I have seen project after project go sideways because one member of the band decided they needed to have their ideas be the most important ideas, but they weren't necessarily the most effective ideas for the group. Ensemble work is kind of an art, and ensemble work is an art that's based on whatever group you're in. And it's important to think of, what is my role in this band? And how am I being effective? How am I, how am I, filling in the role that needs to be filled in? How am I doing the job that needs to be done here? So of course, I'm a big proponent for a big advocate of being yourself and doing your own thing. It's a little clashes with the assertiveness thing of, making sure, you're being assertive in terms of what your ideas are, but make sure that your ideas are an effective idea for how this band is going to accomplish its mission in terms of what you're trying to do. It's going to be different if you're doing a concert or you're playing in a big club, or if you really want to get the crowd going, you're going to have to do some new things. If it's going to be some more rowdy things, if it's going to be like a quiet house concert, you need to be effective and in that emotional space. So each thing is going to be different. Make sure you're being effective. This is something that I have to think about in terms of playing festivals. I am a solo woman doing the singer-songwriter fiddle playing thing, and I go off and play festivals, and I have to be hitting it really hard because I'm competing with all these really cool bands who are many people. And so, I think about effectiveness a lot in terms of rocking a festival gig, because you really have to get up there and you really have to be all the stuff. So that's something that's really important to think about. The last but not least item is to be objective. And again, this is another skill that you have to build over time, but I would say it's probably the most important thing. So we've been talking about all these things you have to be, but objectivity is an extremely important skill when it comes to dealing with critique and criticism, which is going to happen all the time when you're gigging. And, that ties into, the effectiveness of the show and, all of these different things that we're talking about. Being able to be objective about it and not overly emotional is really important. You don't want to be the person who's having an emotional meltdown because they can't handle blah, blah, blah. You want to make sure you have the resilience to withstand some criticism. And if you're working in a band, there's going to be moments where somebody turns around and said, hey, I don't like what you're doing. And it's not personal. They are considering hopefully, not always, but hopefully considering the effectiveness of your role in the group. And what you don't want to do is sit there like a deer in the headlights and have a meltdown about, oh my gosh, somebody said something terrible about me. You want to just be completely cold and objective, not cold, but cool, cool, calm, and collected, about what they're asking you to do, and why they need that change to be done. If it's their band, it's their band. You're a hired gun. You have to be extremely objective. If you're a side man, side woman, side fiddle player, and you are doing whatever the leader of that band who has hired you as a side person wants you to do, then they are your boss. So they get what they want, and you get paid. That's how it works. So you have to be extremely objective in those situations. Where it gets a little murky is working with collaborative bands, where you are supposed to have a creative role, but there is some give and take to that too. It's a little bit like a bit more of a relationship of like, okay, you get what you want this time and I'll get what I want next time. And you have to work that out over a certain amount of time. But you do want to be objective in those situations too. So always go back to thinking about effectiveness. What is the overall effect here? And again, when you're writing music with a group of people and all that stuff, there's plenty of room for things to, there's just a lot of details. There's plenty of things to fight over, and you don't want to do that all the time. So having a good objective attitude towards what you're doing is going to help get through not only being objective about your own role and your own work and your own music, but being objective about other people too. It'll make you a little kinder in the moment to turn around and say, that part that you're singing, there's something not quite right about it. Let's try to figure out what's going on there and see if we can massage it a little bit. So, gonna be tactful at all times. So those are my tips on how to be professional. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was helpful for you. And I hope this helps you with your upcoming gigs that you're going to play, I'm very sure. And I will see you in the next video.